So, welcome. Thank you for joining. We're excited to have you here and to share our thoughts on rethinking retail, the new normal, the new normal, should I say, in 2023. We hope you leave the session today feeling energized, excited, but ultimately with some actual insights you can take back to your desks. So we appreciate you joining us. So before we head on, just thought we'd introduce who we are. So my name is James Hurst. I'm the head of new business here at Quantum, and I'll be expertly, I hope, navigating as your host today.
And hi guys, I'm Andy. I'm the Client Partnership Director here at Quantum. I've been working across FMCG brands over the last sort of 15 years or so, really thinking about how we can take brand experience across omni-channel strategies to drive conversion.
And hi everyone, I'm Chelsea Shrubsole. I'm the strategic lead at Quantum, and my role is really focused on the culture and psychology of how and why shoppers behave the way that they do.
And it will be mainly Andy and Chelsea's voice that you hear today. So you hear lots of them. It'll be very, very useful. So today, what are we going to talk about? So we're going to spend about probably 30 minutes or so talking at you, hopefully giving you lots of information and allowing a good chunk of time at the end of it for Q&A. As we go ahead, please do submit your questions into the chat or to the Q&A bar, and we'll get to them at the end. But ultimately, what we're going to be doing is really digging into why now is the time to rethink retail. And some of the key themes and trends that we're seeing in terms of when it comes to changing consumer behaviour and the opportunities that this presents itself for brands. So hopefully you'll leave today with some real, as I said at the beginning, some real actionable insights to take away to your desk and feeling inspired. Yeah, that's it. Before we do that, obviously I'll be remiss of us not to share a bit about who we are. I'm not going to go into this slide. You will get a recording of this at the end of it. But this is some of our clients. This is what we do. We're all about big ideas in many places. Yeah, we can move on to the next slide now. Before I hand over to Chelsea to say, Chelsea, why now? Why is the time to rethink retail? What I want to do is just quickly share the results of the poll. Hopefully you can see that. Obviously, we asked you which of these topics are the biggest priority. These are the topics that you will no doubt have guessed that we're about to dig into. It looks like just spending habits have pipped product discovery for the biggest priorities for these guys. So Chelsea, over to you to take everyone through our thoughts or your thoughts and see if we can convince them otherwise or not. Over to you.
Yeah, we'll see. So thank you so much. So the question is why now? And I think, in many ways, COVID and that sort of immediate period afterwards where we were kind of recalibrating really just accelerated a lot of trends and behaviours that were sort of already bubbling away. So we were sort of very much fast forwarded through things like, the drive to digital, the focus on sustainability and the sort of wider social consciousness piece, as well as things like convenience. And I think, whilst there was a lot of change, it did at least feel like you could see the direction of travel of what was happening. And it's a trajectory that us as marketeers are often working into, and it's the way that our briefs are given to us. And I think what we wanted to do is just spend some time today talking about what are some of the changes that we're seeing, and what are some of the nuances that we need to be aware of, because we have sort of, not new issues in the market. It's almost like an evolution of the issues, but I feel like 2023 is really shaking us out of that trajectory. So, of course, there's the cost of living. And I think what's interesting at the moment is we've seen some changes in behaviour, but actually they're starting to sort of set around some habits now. We've got crisis fatigue. We're just seeing loads of data points where consumers are just detaching. They just don't have the mental bandwidth to keep dealing with this stuff, and that's changing the way they're behaving. We've of course got the continued drive into digital acceleration and sort of lots of questions about what that means and what that's going to look like in the next couple of years. And then also, I think, just from a more of a psychological perspective, you know, there is just this natural tendency to you know, whenever a trend or behavior or something goes too far in one direction, what you tend to see is, you know, the pendulum swing the other way, and it creates the opposite mentality and the mindset shift. And I think that's what we're really starting to see at the moment. So, you know, what we're saying is there's a lot more sort of what's the right word? There's a lot more sort of nuance between some of these issues that I think, you know, even sort of 6 months ago we sort of felt were fairly set. But issues around discovery, speed, splurging, sustainability, it does definitely feel like there's more nuance, and we think that there's a real opportunity for brands to get ahead of this and start speaking to consumers in a slightly different way.
And so today, guys, we're going to dive into those 4 key trends with you, but we really want this session to be helpful as you move forward into kind of planning out your brand strategy. So under each trend, we're going to be kind of putting to you a couple of implications that we think are really important in brands showing up disruptively and doing things differently. And to kind of bring those to life, we've got just a couple of case studies that we want to share with you as kind of inspiration and stimulus to you and your teams, because I think it's really important that, you know, as brands move into kind of 23-24 planning, they're thinking really smartly about how we can leverage these trends to be different, to behave like challenger brands. So fingers crossed, you'll walk away today having understood those trends and implications and some tangible examples as you go away and start building out your brand plans.
Yeah, so the first topic we wanted to talk to you about was, you know, this is really about search, but more specifically around a theme of discovery. So the sort of new news, I guess, to this is, you know, for the first time, social has overtaken search for product discovery, and that's, you know, specifically for Gen Z consumers. But I think what's interesting is millennials are very much teetering on the edge of this milestone, and of course, it's going to just go more and more in this direction. And there's lots of repercussions to that. I think, firstly, you know, it's worth mentioning that it means the competitive set is changing. You know, the tools that we have at our disposal now means it's much easier for, you know, us as people in the creator economy to launch products and to get them into markets and to grow them through this sort of through social channels. So, you know, we call them the bedroom brands, and, you know, it's not that any of these are, you know, the majority are unlikely to become your big competitors, but I think when you put them as a collective, you know, it becomes this long tail that's increasingly going to start eating up market share. And I think there's a couple of things to that. You know, firstly, it's just about sort of recognizing that these are brands that, you know, because they're newer, they're able to align with sort of new values and hold more credibility and authenticity in some of the spaces that matter to people at the moment. And also, without sort of just being too brutal, like, you know, they're infinitely cooler than some of sort of the more sort of bigger, more established brands. So, you know, how do you start to work with that, really? But I think the biggest shift that we want to talk to you today is thinking about that mindset change. So you're going from consumers that go, you know, I know what I want to find, and search engines and algorithms get me there as quickly as possible, to suddenly going, you know, I just want to explore things that I didn't even know I needed. So that sense of ease is being completely replaced by, you know, serendipity, by, you know, this visually driven world of storytelling. And if you think about the way that starts, it's, you know, consumers are starting from this place of curiosity, and then they're going down this fun rabbit hole of brands, of products, and it's one that's super effective. I think I read something yesterday that said that impulse buying is now level to in real life on digital channels, and it's growing. You know, this is where people are buying and discovering and sort of driving that behavior. And if we think about how that shifts to social expectations, these are spaces being driven by trends, and brands really need to be culturally relevant increasingly to be part of that narrative. And whilst it might be being set in social, as you'll see with, you know, as we've seen with all digital first trends, it has a knock-on effect of what people expect in real life as well. So the question becomes, you know, how do we start to create exciting shopping experiences that match consumers' identity, community, and interests as much as a TikTok algorithm? we're not claiming that we have the answer to this question, but I think what we've tried to do is create some thought starters around what are some of the stuff that could become increasingly important for us to start considering. And the first one that we wanted to take you through is this idea about buying by vibe. So products, services, experiences, increasingly they need to be designed around how they make us feel. So this is recognizing, if discovery is going to be based on mood, aesthetic, and feeling, and if consumers are already sort of giving much more attention to the way things make, emotional well-being and the way things make us feel, then let's allow consumers to browse in that way. And I think we're already seeing a lot of this happening. We're seeing it in terms of like product development and the names given to products, as well as in this kind of wider merchandising piece. So the example that we've got on the right there is Not on the High Streets, who their Christmas pop-up was all around gifting, guided by how you want the recipient to feel.
And there's a couple of other really good case studies that we think really brings this kind of buy by vibe or buy by mood concept to life. And this first one is actually from Argos. And Argos, if you think, whilst being a homeware kind of furniture brand, they're very different to their competitive set in that they don't have showrooms that you can go and experience the product in situ. So what they've done here is create something called the Argos Mood Hotel, which was a pop-up that took place in 2022 last year. And it was all about bringing their collection into this hotel pop-up where they created 6 rooms, each bringing to life a different mood and a different vibe. And I think it's really interesting because they worked with Pinterest actually to create this pop-up in analysing the kind of 6 key interior design and mood-led trends that they were seeing in the marketplace to bring a really credible story that consumers could come along to and discover for themselves. And just to give you a couple of examples, they had what they called the Luxe Room, which was all about kind of plush velvet finishes and gold opulence. But also, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner there, this nature-inspired room, which was all about earthy, natural colour tones and kind of rugged and plant finishes. So really interesting to see how a brand that is traditionally, a catalogue-based company, very much driven on their website, through to an experience-led concept that brings that vibe to life. And the second case study is really close to our heart because we've been really lucky to work on Aperol over the last couple of years. And listen, I'm sure we all know in the room today that, Aperol Spritz is synonymous with summer. As soon as you drink an Aperol Spritz, you really enter that feeling of sociability and those really great times in the summer. And our task each year is how do we re-recruit drinkers that have lapsed during the winter into Aperol Spritz in the spring, summer, but also how do we recruit new drinkers into Aperol Spritz? And the way we kind of challenged ourselves is to say, well, what if we're not selling Spritz? What if we're selling sunsets? What if we're selling that mood, that vibe that Chelsea's been talking about to really bring to life that experience? And that's what we did here. This concept's called Piazza Aperol. It's all about bringing that Italian sociability, endless optimism, sociability and togetherness to places around the UK. And it's really stretchy. So this idea, as you can see on the slide, was a big pop-up in Covent Garden, but we were able to take that vibe-led concept into bars across the UK, even in the off-trade through kind of shopper experiences, right through to third space. So I think our kind of challenge to you on Buy by Vibe is to say, how can you think about how you show up to your shoppers and consumers, experience, vibe and mood first and product second?
Yeah, and so then the second consideration under this is, thinking about how you can sell cultural clout. So, if you think about the fact that status, of course, used to be attached to what we owned, but actually, if we're in the creator economy, it's much more about those immaterial assets. So things like taste, creativity, knowledge, and belonging. And I think, it sort of taps into this idea that like we all just want to be more interesting, more in the know, more in the inside circle. And I think Prime is a really, a great example of this. Obviously it's a sort of extreme, but you've got these you've got these two YouTubers who, you know, really only a sort of, you know, anyone my age probably has never heard of, but to a certain audience, these, you know, people are very, you know, this is the community that they belong to, and they've created this kind of tidal wave of social hype for this product, and then this drip sale method. So you had to sort of be in the know and sort of understand when it was about to be released, and you had to sort of put in a bit of effort to getting your hands on one of these drinks. And it's just a really interesting cultural phenomenon, and it's sort of you know, certainly to the extreme end of the scale.
And brands of all shapes and sizes can use social clout in the way they deliver their marketing strategy. And I think this is a really fantastic example, which I'm sure most of you have already seen out in the press and even in store in Waitrose where they're listed. But Heinz is a really interesting challenge because they're 150 years old. Their core consumer is aging, and their big task is how are we recruiting the next generations of Heinz consumers? What appeals to Gen Z? How can we diversify our offering, change our marketing strategy, build new NPD that's all about recruitment? And this is just a really fantastic example, you know, instigated by, you know, Gigi Hadid doing her kind of vodka pasta sauce online, became super viral. And within weeks or months, Heinz were able to set up a partnership with Absolute in creating this limited edition pasta sauce. And, you know, it's helped them gain so much coverage on the back of that social listening and that social clout to create something that's really disruptive and newsworthy within a category that's inherently very old and quite kind of stable in the way that it operates. So go and try it in Waitrose. It is in store. I saw it yesterday. And the other example is, like, it doesn't have to be about NPD. And I suppose we wanted to make the point today that, you know, social clout gives brand owners the opportunity to behave in lots of different ways, and sometimes very nimbly in a very agile way. And I'm hoping that last year, most of you guys will remember the very viral clip of Emma Darcy talking about her favorite drink. And this Negroni Spagliato was her favorite because it's got Prosecco in, and it's all about the way she delivered it. And it really captured the imagination of kind of consumers across the UK and globally. And what did Campari do in response? Well, the great thing is there is no Negroni without Campari. Campari has that brilliant ownership of the serve. And what they were able to do was suddenly, without any kind of warning, dial up a whole social campaign and influencer strategy that was all about this new drink. And more than that, they were able to secure, you know, menu features for a serve they weren't really even thinking about into kind of key bars across the UK. And again, when we're talking about something like the Negroni, it's a very polarizing taste, very bitter, quite hard to access. And this kind of Prosecco in the serve actually opens up the flavor. So it became a really good recruitment model for them too. So don't be put off thinking that social clout's all about NPD and big dramatic things like Prime. It could easily be leveraged through smart, clever social influencer strategies as well.
Yeah, and then the third one under this is, you know, create a bit of friction. And, you know, I know that flies in the face of conventional retail thinking, but in this world of one-click buys, you know, we're kind of in danger of making brands seem a bit forgettable. You know, the more that no one has to think about us, the more commodity we end up becoming. And this can really be attributed to the IKEA effect, which is a bias that tells us that we'll place higher value on stuff that we have to work a bit harder for. Anyone that's got kids of a certain age will know, you know, Build-A-Bear, you know, it's the exact same principle of, you know, you will spend more for the privilege of being part of the process. And just one way to sort of, one example to bring this to life is through McDonald's. So you might remember a couple of years ago when they started introducing kiosk ordering, they made that ordering process infinitely easier. And as a result, you know, it was very successful. Individual check prices rose. But at the same time, their affinity scores started coming down. And it was almost like it was so easy that, you know, the tipping balance between enjoyment and ease started to go into the wrong direction. I think it's really important to think about how do we play in that space where, yes, we want to be easy, but actually we also want to make people stop and think and, you know, reconsider us as well.
Of course, the great thing about screen ordering is that nobody can see how much you've ordered and how many sides you've added, which is a bonus. So guys, there's the first trend, so discovery. So the things we'd love for you to walk away and think about is how can you leverage those implications? So buy by vibe, sell cultural clout, and create some fiction.
Yeah, and so the next one we wanted to talk to you about was convenience, and actually we've recalled this speed, because for a long time convenience was speed, but actually what we're starting to see is that demand for that ultra fast is slowing. So you've got here the most popular delivery date is now 5 days, and of course that isn't for perishable goods of grocery, but actually we are seeing signs that this kind of need for instant is declining. So ultra fast delivery companies are struggling or have shut down. 15-minute deliveries was always going to feel a little bit gimmicky for most, but I think it's kind of interesting what's happening here, because of course some of this is consumers are just switching back to some pre-pandemic habits. But I think, as big a part of that is there's this kind of more thoughtful approach where it's better quality over speed, and it's about sort of going slower and being more intentional. And, these themes around care and trustworthiness, there is nothing convenient about having to return wrong or faulty products or replace things. And actually, I think there is a sort of shifting consumer sentiment that says, I'm prepared to wait if it means that something's done in the right way. So the question that we wanted to pose is like, well, what shouldn't we be compromising for speed? And this first one, I think, is, I sort of can't emphasize enough, but it's, leaning into the joy of not yet. Like, anticipation is such a powerful emotion. So research shows that the pleasure derived for anticipating something is often equal or even greater to the event itself. So by making things super instant, we're sort of almost depriving consumers of that kind of that moment that is actually so enjoyable. I think there's the research that sits behind this also shows that the more we anticipate something, the more satisfied we become with our purchase or the consumption moment, and actually the stronger our memory of that also becomes. So it's a really, really powerful marketing tool, actually. And the example we've got here, and sorry to step out of the FMCG world, but I think this is something that everyone can relate to, is you can go on Nike and you can buy a pair of trainers and get them tomorrow. But if you want a pair of Air Jordans, you've got to work and you've got to wait for them. So you'll have to sign up for a raffle, you'll wait in a virtual waiting room, you'll put yourself on mailing lists. And of course, that's one example where you're sort of hyping up a product before you can purchase. And I think almost like the sort of the other side to that, and the place that I think brands aren't perhaps using as much as they could at the moment, is that space in between purchase and delivery. Like, how do we start to tease that experience? How do we start to talk about flavors or tastings or pairings in a way that starts to whet the appetite of a product before it's actually lands on your door?
So we started thinking about, which brands are doing anticipation really well, and where better place to start than single malt whiskey. This whole category is built on anticipation. It takes at least 3 years to create a single malt. And this was a serious challenge for a new distillery called the Isle of Raasay, who set up in 2017 and had to think about, okay, what do we talk about? How do we engage and recruit consumers over these years that we're waiting for our first release? And we think what they did was really smart. They created this inaugural release, this 2020 inaugural release, and they launched it for pre-sale. And what they did by kind of launching this pre-sale is obviously they built demand, but that they were then, over kind of at least a 3-year period, were able to build a really comprehensive ECRM strategy where they were telling the story of the distillery and building really meaningful brand affiliation with their consumer. Of course, anticipation is such a big part of the purchase journey. They were really able to capitalize on that experience and that strategy. But we're not all single malts, and actually we can build anticipation into everyday purchases. And one of the brands we've seen doing this really smartly is Donut Time. Donut Time obviously had a massive boom over lockdown. They're a London-based donut shop, but created these amazing decorate yourself at home kits. And actually their model has changed slightly, because over lockdown we were ordering these kits and wanted them next day. But what they're seeing now is that consumers are still placing the order, but they're selecting their delivery date for when suits them sometime in the future. And in that distance of time between placing the order, parting with your cash, to receiving the product, they're really very smart at keeping you keeping in touch with you about the product and about the experience. So they do things like send out templates for you to print at home to do your icing. You know, they send kind of nice little videos on how to do the coolest new decorations on your donut. So really nice example of maximizing that period of time between purchase and consumption. And we just wanted to nod towards the brand partnership they did with Monkey Shoulder that you can see on the right there, because if you feel that perhaps it's less easy to deliver that sense of anticipation in your own right, think about how brand partnerships can be used as a way of piggybacking on those experiences that already exist.
And then also think about, better practices. So in those categories where we, can just opt for going a bit slower, is there a way to tie that into a benefit to the consumer and a benefit to the business as well? So there is this opportunity for savvy brands to save money and create a halo of goodwill by standing apart from the pricier and more polluting one-day shipping models. And there's a really nice example to this. So Timberland, who have a sort of bigger narrative around planting a tree, but they're offering to plant a tree every time customers choose to have their orders delivered in 4 to 8 days over the standard 3. And so far that's resulted in about 55,000 trees being planted before, but as I mentioned, it's that halo of goodwill, and it's actually sort of standing apart and doing things differently in a way that makes absolute financial sense for the business, who super speedy orders is a complete headache and drain on resource, but it also makes sense for a consumer who's actually prepared to wait a little bit longer now.
And a really smart way of tying in sustainability with that idea of anticipation and convenience as well. So there you guys have it. That's speed for you. So first job to be done is anticipation. We know that anticipation is as enjoyable as the kind of event of experiencing the product. So how can you build that into your strategies? And then, as we've just nodded to, how can we build in better practices as part of our speed or convenience experience?
Yeah, slightly shorter section, that one, but I think based on the poll results at the beginning, probably the right way to go. So the third topic that we wanted to talk to you about, this is spending, but we're calling it splurging, because we're really sort of seeing a change in behaviour. Oh, just wait for that. Yeah, so recession fatigue is really setting in, and we're not even technically in the recession yet. But particularly for Gen Z, and there's been some research that's come out recently that's shown that actually it's Gen Z who are least likely to be changing their spending behaviour or worrying about saving and sort of that nest egg for the future. And actually that starts to make a bit of sense if you think about the psychology of it, because of course why would you not focus on the present moment when you're not sure of what the future brings? So if you're in this state of anxiety anyway around paying bills and losing your jobs, it kind of becomes easier just to almost stop caring about what happens. Tied to this is the fact that we've never had a downturn followed by such a time of severe restriction. So you have got that kind of pent up demand. And of course, what we're not saying is that there are not more frugal and savvy shopping skills emerging, because that is the reality of making ends meet and paying rent and all those kinds of stuff. But what we are saying is that you have this very contrasting mentality of emotional indulgence, where treat yourself culture is in many instances overriding cost of living concerns, particularly for your younger generations. So the question becomes, how do we do decadence in a cost of living crisis? And I think that there are two things happening here that I think it's worth sort of we're aware of, but it's worth kind of just refocusing on and thinking about the implications of. And the first is that you've got this kind of trade down behavior. So, you know, what are the experiences that people aren't able to spend on? So, you know, the holidays, the big dinners out, those kind of things. And how can your brand substitute some, or how are people using your brand to substitute some of those sort of nicer, more indulgent escapism treats? And then at the other end of the scale, you've got people trading up. So you've got these kind of small luxuries that are just about sort of making the day-to-day a bit more bearable. And, you know, we always find this, you know, with a recession, and I'm sure you're all aware of, you know, the lipstick effect, but this idea that we start spending more on those sort of small treats because we can't spend the money on the bigger treats that we really want to. So I think the question to ask is, you know, firstly, based on those sort of shifts, are your consumers still who you thought they were, or is it time to start looking at demographics again and finding out how that shifted? Because, you know, in lots of instances, it will have done. And, you know, and of course, you know, and I know brand owners are thinking about this all the time, but like, what new occasions should we be aligning to? So the first thing we want to talk about is like leaning into this narrative of live a little. You know, we do spend more when we have heightened emotions, you know, and it connects to that mood market. But like, how do we make people just feel like here's a little antidote, a little bit of joy to the everyday? How do we help consumers get that fix?
And I think the next example does this really well. I'm a bit of a sucker for taco, so I particularly like this example. But in the US market, to celebrate National Taco Day, what Taco Bell did was create a pass, which was $10. And for $10, you were able to grab a taco every day for the whole month. So in terms of those sort of like live a little, that little trend around kind of how do we give somebody kind of that little treat every day, Taco Bell really lent into that by offering this sort of value deal that ran across a month, across a time like National Taco Day that's really important in their promotional calendar.
I think it's a really nice way of showing up empathetically and leaning into that. You know, this is similar, but you know, again, just leaning into that sort of that treat culture, give consumers a way to access, you know, the decadence they crave. And I think tied to this is we're starting to see a bit of an anti-wellness backlash as well, where consumers are starting to rebel against the sort of negative side of wellness culture. And actually, you know, emotionally, we should be treating ourselves and having these sort of delicious, indulgent moments. So we're seeing this in new product development. So, you know, Bailey's is the example there with their vanilla milkshake. But also in the consumption occasions that we're starting to market into, and the serves that we're starting to see. You know, there is definitely this sense that now is the time for indulgence.
And the case study we wanted to share really plays into this treat culture within the shots category. You know, we're really seeing, for example, with Tequila Rose, a real mind shift towards better tasting, more treat-worthy drinks and serves that taste great. No longer is shots about a punishment or a dare to do with friends. It's all about elevating those moments with your friends. So we're talking great flavored shots, serves that are decadent and indulgent. And with Tequila Rose, we're kind of working with them to understand how we can leverage occasions as a way of driving that sense of treat. And brunch is a really big opportunity for them. So, you know, brunches is all about sociability and getting together. It's about those little wins. It's about those nice indulgent moments together. And actually, you know, Tequila Rose can play really well in this space because it's lower in ABV, which is the demand that we know exists out there, but it also tastes really great. So I guess what we really want to challenge you guys on out there to think about is how can you use your product, but also occasion as a way of driving that treat culture mentality. And that's spending, splurging. So how do we help our consumers live a little, but also how do we build in that rich, meaningful treat culture with our brand?
Yeah, and so our final topic is around sustainability, and you know, this is one that might contradict some existing information out there, because of course people are still buying sustainably. You know, we live in a market where that's just become so easy to do, and you know, is the sort of default for most products now. But and of course, you know, environmental issues remain a top concern for most. But what we are starting to see is consumers' social agency is ticking downwards. Now, what we mean by agency is the extent to which consumers feel that they can engage with, contribute, or be responsible for environmental issues. So this was a GWI study, and it was a global study, but it showed that many sustainability related trend lines were all beginning to point downwards. So that included things like interest in environmental issues, self-reported recycling, the willingness to spend more on eco-friendly products, and environmental optimism. At the same time, WGSN has come out with a piece of research that shows that the number of people that are interested in news and current affairs is starting to decline, particularly in that younger generation. So it declined by about 7% last year. So you have got this kind of sentiment of people starting to switch off a little bit. And there's sort of two sort of broad drivers of that. I think first, it's this real struggle to translate values into actions. You know, there has always been an intention action gap, and that's most heavily felt in the younger generations who will claim to be the most sustainable, but actually don't have the ability to back that up in terms of behavior. And then you've also got this impulse to disengage, which is, we've spoken about this sort of at the beginning of the deck, but this idea that like there's just too much, I don't have the headspace for this. So it's really being driven by means, headspace, and skepticism. So by means, sustainability typically means costing more. Headspace, I can't prioritize this right now. And then skepticism, the sort of realization for most consumers that the claims that are coming out there don't actually stand up and probably aren't as ethical as they're making out to be. So the question is, how do we stop asking so much from consumers? And the first thought that we just wanted to put in here is, initiative. In a cost of living crisis, sustainability needs to be redefined alongside accessibility. So, this idea that initiatives are only going to be considered sustainable if the average person can find and afford them.
And I think a really good example of this is a pop-up from Sainsbury's called Sainsfreeze that happened outside Box Park. And this was all about accessibility. It was about saying to shoppers, come into our kind of walk-in freezer pop-up and help yourself to free frozen fruit and veg and fish and all sorts of things, all for free, but all about championing kind of the role that kind of frozen food has in supporting shoppers in a cost of living crisis, but also reducing food waste. So really helping consumers to manage their grocery bills, but also inadvertently giving that sense of confidence that they're making their kitchens more sustainable.
And the next one is think about how you can help close the intention action gap. And I think we've just got to a point where like increasingly consumers just don't want to sweat the small stuff. We don't want to just, the plastic straws are useful and paper straws are annoying, and fast forward fashion has, its grips, to a generation that would say that they want to be sustainable, but actually, the temptation to buy into these brands is too high. So I think stop thinking about sort of what are the small things that we're asking consumers to do, and actually increasingly think about, how do you show up as a forward-thinking, ethical brand that adds intrinsic value. So the example that we've got here is Adidas's new runners collection. So they've got a shoe that's upcycled, but it's also asking people to partake in an activism challenge. So for every kilometer they run, Adidas cleans up plastic bottles for a certain amount of bottles from the beach. And I think what I like about this example is, you're not asking people to do something they're not already doing. These are runners, these are people engaged in that behavior, but you're just helping them feel good about the choices they make at the same time as getting them to do piggybacking the stuff they're already doing.
And we really feel that Accolade Wines are doing a really good job of helping consumers manage that intention action gap. And they're doing this through their kind of new innovation packaging. So on Banrock Wines, they've got their flat plastic bottles that are now available across all Co-op stores. And this is a real disruptive innovation that's really shaking up the category, because, the wine category is saturated with exactly the same glass wine bottles across all of the shelves. And actually what this kind of plastic flat bottle is doing is it's demonstrating from accolade to their customers that they're a forward-thinking, disruptive, sustainable first company, but also it helps consumers and shoppers to try and make better choices with very low effort. And the story behind these flat bottles is really compelling. You know, they're using 75% less energy than glass in production. They're 40% smaller than glass, which means they're using half as much pallet space in the distribution network. So lots of good carbon stories as a result of these flat plastic bottles, but really easy for the consumer or shopper to buy that product feeling and knowing that they're making a positive contribution without having made too much effort, and importantly, without having had to pay any more money for it versus the glass bottle. So have a think about how can we use packaging innovation and other things within your marketing mix to really take the effort away from the consumer and give them the easy choice.
And the next one is just thinking about how we go beyond badging. So you know, there's a you know, this idea that 88% of Gen Z don't trust brands' environmental, social, and governance claims. There was a study that came out that said nearly half of all ecological claims made by plastic and plastic packaged products were also misleading. So they have every right to be questioning a lot of these claims and sort of poking holes in them. I think this is again a fashion example, but there's the US sustainable fashion retailer Toward, and they are only allowing consumers to make 12 purchases on its platform every year. So, you know, they're taking a real stand around against overconsumption and getting people to pause and really think about what they want to buy, even if it means shopping less from their brand. So, you know, I think increasingly we're going to see these brands and products, and particularly these new brands and products that are being developed now, you know, it's not going to be a badge. It's, you know, it's absolutely intrinsic to who they are. And that's something that we really need to start considering how we show up against that.
And we couldn't talk about beyond badging without talking about B Corp. Although I must say this is not a webinar about B Corp. I feel like that would need a session in its own right. But what we did want to present to you guys today is a bit of a provocation on the role of badges. And of course, there's massive importance around B Corp. What it does is it certifies your total business practice in terms of how you're driving your sustainable initiatives, everything from supply chain to materials to distribution and everything in between. And of course, what it also does is it provides that visual shortcut for consumers, perhaps in store, online, to believe that the brand is really making that effort in driving that sustainable ambition. But it's not necessarily always the right thing to do. And I suppose what we want you guys to think about as we move into kind of brand planning is, you know, what is the right certification, if anything, for my brand? You know, interestingly, the practices that B Corp stipulate in the case of Illy means that they're no longer able to claim fair trade status in the UK. And that's really kind of an interesting dichotomy, isn't it? Because in a category like coffee, consumers, particularly in the UK, are so used to fair trade being really a hygiene factor for being in that category. And so a big job to do is how do you therefore, without fair trade, still demonstrate and reassure shoppers and consumers that we're still living by exactly the same values and ethics that fair trade offer. But of course, badging isn't the only way that brands can tell their sustainable story. And we thought we'd stay within the coffee category and talk about the Odd Coffee Company, because what they're doing is they're using storytelling as a really meaningful way to tell the story of all the sustainable initiatives that they're delivering. And if you don't know them already, the way they work is they take all of the damaged, sort of unwanted, short sell-by date pods from various suppliers across the UK, and they bundle them into a subscription model for consumers to receive at home. And when you look at their ECRM strategy, all of their social, they're really using storytelling as a way of bringing that to life. Now, of course, this business is built on sustainability, so it's much easier to tell that story. But have a think about how you can tell that story around certain initiatives or pillars of your activity in a way that really resonates with consumers. And so that concludes sustainability, our kind of fourth and final trend. So how do we redefine along accessibility? How do we close that intention action gap? And badging, you know, do we go beyond badging? What's the right solution for you?
Yeah, so then we just wanted to leave you with 5 key takeouts. So I guess firstly, I think think about what are the 2020, check your assumptions and look for consumer nuances, like how's the market changing, and of course reach out to us if you want to hear any more and any more thoughts around our thoughts on that. Think about cultural clout. That has never been more fundamental for brands. Consider what's more meaningful than speed. Have a look at your consumer profile. Has it changed? What are your core occasions now looking like, and what's that demographic profile? And what can you do to make your sustainability efforts stand apart?
Great stuff, guys. Thank you. Some really interesting examples there, I think. I just have to say, I particularly like, is it Tord, the fashion brand that restricts the amount you buy? I think that's a really interesting example there. So yeah, question time. If you've got any questions, do send them through quickly now. We've had a few questions about whether people can have recordings of this, or whether we can get access to kind of presentation. Rest assured, we have recorded it, and we will be sending it to you, so no problems there. If you want to kind of relive the experience, yes, again, you're more than welcome to then. Before we come to questions, I just want to say I'm just launching another poll. If you could go ahead there and before you check out and fill that in, that's fantastic. It won't be made public, so that's all good. But I did actually have some questions for you. The first question actually I had was, it sort of touches onto the discovery and sustainability. So it merges two of the themes that we sort of talked about there. I guess it's about, your comments around sort of impulse buying is growing. I saw something today. There's a guy called Alex Leach has launched a new book, which is really touching on overconsumption. And talking about, the book's called The World is on Fire, Yet We're Still Buying Shoes. Obviously, his kind of takeaway from it is about reframing impulse buying to focus on kind of intentional purchases. I mean, in your opinion, what's your perspective on that? I mean, how does, in terms of the new normal, what's the effect that's going to have? Do you agree, disagree?
I think it's the right thing. It's the right thing to do, right? It's the right thing, and to ask consumers to pause and reconsider and sort of really think about what they need. And whilst of course that's sort of counterintuitive to sales, I think culturally it helps you show up as a brand actually doing the right thing. And I think there is also there's a business practice element to this as well. We are. I saw something about the sort of I forget the stats, but like the number of returns that are happening. That costs a lot of money for businesses. They've got to sort of get it out to you quickly, and then they've got to deal with all your returns. And actually, there's probably a sound business case for a company to go, actually, is this really what you want? Have you checked these details? Have you looked at our sizing, and build in some of that sort of good friction? I think if it's done in the right way, it can be really helpful for consumers and appreciated by them as well.
Yeah, and I think also, there's evidence to suggest that consumers are building in that good friction to their own purchase journey. So I read recently that saved lists on e-commerce sites are becoming more popular than baskets. So, consumers are proactively sort of building in that friction into their own purchase journey. So it's interesting to see how brands can sort of be part of that experience rather than just be a bystander. Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point. Actually, and that taps into another question that's come through around the friction. Obviously, citing kind of examples like one example is Amazon Go, and the question of being able to walk in and walk out without actually doing anything, and the questions it leaves around have I been charged the right amount, have I been charged too much, have I been charged for somebody else's, have I been charged enough, all these sort of questions, the answers, there's sort of that angle of it. But also I saw an example again sort of earlier today, in actual fact, about really an experience that was so friction free that actually people didn't even realize they were using it. What does that have the effect for the brand itself? No one actually knows they're using it. I mean, again, have you got a perspective about how that kind of, I guess, fits into all this? I mean, is that positive? Is that negative? What's your perspective on that, do you think?
I think you've hit it there. The more people don't think about you, the more utility you become. So you end up becoming a bit like a mobile phone provider. we all know who we're on, but we don't really give it any thought or particularly know the benefits. And I think that's the danger we're in. I think it's interesting your point around trustworthiness. There is statistics that show that easier you make it, the less consumers trust you as and think of you as being reliable. So there's lots of airline companies and travel providers at the moment, and they're actively putting in, that spinning wheel of death that you get when instead of giving you the recommendation they've already got, it has already been generated. They're actually building in a sort of bit of a pain point, because they've found that when they do that, consumers trust that the recommendation they're getting is sound and considerate and personalized. And I think we're kind of in this sort of middle phase of sort of AI and all this kind of stuff, and perhaps in the not so distant future we'll become much happier with that, and perhaps that will stop being an issue. But I think where consumers are at the minute is we sort of need a bit of hand holding and sort of reassurance that this is, you're being seen and heard and being treated as an individual.
Basically, the longer you wait for a Skyscanner result to come through, the more you believe you've got the best price.
The more you'll probably be prepared to pay. Yeah.
Whilst we're still humans and all that, we want all that kind of stuff. Cool. One final question before we let everybody go. Again, it touches back onto sustainability actually, and it kind of references the kind of accolade example that you talked about, Andy, which was some research. Again, I think it was 4,000 respondents across UK, US, and the Netherlands into basically the perception of sustainability. So the research basically showed that actually no matter how much plastic a product has, if you layer it in paper, people automatically think that it's more sustainable. Negative, positive, is that a good thing?
It's a challenge, isn't it? Because and something that we're seeing, with that accolade example, is that we've all been taught plastic is bad. Plastic's the devil. Don't use plastic, and they've just substituted a glass bottle for a plastic bottle. Now, all of the science and data shows and demonstrates that that's a more sustainable choice because of the reduction on carbon footprint and all those sorts of things in distribution. But how do you convince a shopper that's looking at a wall of glass and then seeing a single plastic bottle? And there's all sorts of innovations out there, like Carlsberg looking at paper bottles. And James, you mentioned to me the other day the kind of seaweed packaging that sort of melts in your mouth, so you end up with sort of water pockets that you just put in your mouth and it just sort of disappears as you consume it. So I think it's a real challenge for brands, because what is the right way to go isn't necessarily the thing that's going to drive the best conversion with shoppers. So it comes down to messaging and communication and giving consumers the reassurance that this unconventional way of buying a product is the better way.
Definitely agree. Notplo, I think, was the brand we were talking about, wasn't it? Excellent. Well, look, I think we've come to the end of our time. Sadly, we'll give everyone 5 minutes back of their time. But no, Andy, Chelsea, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts there. Hopefully you guys, thank you for joining for a start. Hopefully you found it interesting, you found it useful, and you have some takeaways to take back, some actual insight to take back to your desk. Before you go, obviously, if there's anything you think of that you think, I should have asked that at the time, obviously this is where we are. Feel free to contact us. Any questions, if you'd like to know more any of the particular themes, do let us know. But we've enjoyed sharing our thoughts with you, and have a good rest of your Thursday. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.